Well, hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the Impactus Young Man's podcast. My name is Jordan. I'm so stoked you're listening. Have you ever had a moment where you asked yourself, who even am I? This often happens when something that so easily defined us comes to an end. I mean, think if you play sports and you get injured, or if you're great at your job and they let you go, or if you're a parent and your kids move out. Oftentimes, we don't realize that our identity was rooted in something until that something is gone. The question for today's podcast is, what does it look like to have an identity that's unshakable and like a good concrete foundation, unmovable, that despite what storms come, it stands strong? Well, on today's podcast, I chat with my new friend, Troy Lydiate. He's doing a lot. First and foremost, he's a dad and a husband. He's also a recording artist. He works for Apologetics Canada as their creative director, and he has a ton of other interests. Now, Troy's story is quite incredible. Abandoned as a baby in Kingston, Jamaica, he was adopted by a Canadian family and raised in Regina, Saskatchewan. And as you'll hear over the course of this podcast, this created for some unique challenges for Troy in understanding and navigating his own identity. And because of that, Troy has an incredible perspective on what it means to be a child of God and why understanding your sonship as a man is so vital. That and so much more on today's podcast. So let's jump right in. Well, Troy, man, thank you so much for joining us. It's amazing to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jordan. I'm pumped to be here.
Dude, I got to get something out of the way right from the get-go. And I hope you don't mind me, but when I was researching kind of what you do and I was looking at your YouTube channel, I'm like, man, I know this guy from somewhere. Like I know Troy from somewhere. And then I came across a video where it all made sense to me. A couple years ago, you went viral, right? Like you kind of
I did. And it is one of those hilarious stains on a person's history. Yes, I did go viral for singing in a video about my order from Popeyes.
And I wasn't going to bring it up, but I thought, you know what, it's still on his YouTube. And so I assume it's fair game, but, yeah, so you sang the song about chicken, and man, and I recognized it immediately. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm actually podcasting with the chicken guy, the podcast.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's fun.
There are so many layers to that story now, and it's funny because the reason I keep it up is actually like, this is the funny thing, is like, I'm such a preacher's kid that, you know, God will speak through everything and every opportunity, every situation, and so I keep the video up now because it's actually a huge lesson in not chasing things or being ready for the unexpected. Okay. Because me doing this video, actually, it's funny, we're about to have this whole conversation around, you know, identity. This video actually, was like a catalyst for a huge identity shift that I was not expecting because I wasn't preparing for it at all. So I don't want to take your intro. We can get into that.
No, listen, let's jump into that. I was going to say, you know, like, and I Googled like Popeyes guy, a video song, and just because you opened the door, there was all sorts of reactions to this video, right? And I wasn't intending on going down this route, but about identity and about all sorts of things. And so before we jump to kind of the crux of it, tell us a little bit about, you know, Troy, tell us a little bit about your story, and then we'll have to circle back to this video at some point.
Absolutely.
Why that is the case.
Yeah. So my name is Troy. I am a husband. I am a father. I am a worship leader and musical creative. I do hip hop music and create all kinds of different, like, I have a very eclectic musical upbringing. So, I make all kinds of music, but for the most part, people know me as a hip hop artist in that arena. I'm the creative director for Apologetics Canada, which kind of entails anything that needs to look pretty or need a bow on it. I'm the guy. I'm also our podcast host and producer. And, that in and of itself keeps a guy's hands busy. But man, pure and simply, I'm just a lover of Jesus and a lover of what he wants to do with people. And on the more playful side of things, I'm an athlete. So I grew up playing soccer pretty much my whole life. I recently just shifted into playing flag football. And
I thought you were going to say pickleball because that's like,
hey, no, I can't do it, man. I can't do it. Um, yeah. And, apart from that, I am a Shark Week enthusiast. I love my
come
animal
on.
documentaries. All right. David Attenborough has my heart. So
That's amazing, man. And it's so funny. I can't like the flag football thing. I can't get behind, but
fair.
the Slark Week, I can get behind that for
There
sure.
we go. There we go.
Listen, man, hearing a little bit of your story was so fascinating, and how you landed in the middle of Regina and that
Oh
whole
my
thing.
gosh.
Curious for our listeners, instead of me trying to summarize, can you
Sure.
just share a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
Yeah.
And kind of speaking of this identity thing, like kind of when the lights came on of like, oh man, I've got to sort this out.
Yeah. So I was born in Kingston, Jamaica, and I was adopted around the age of 2 by my two pastors, Bob and Gwen Lydiate from Regina, Saskatchewan. Um, that to make a long story short, I don't have any connection to my biological family whatsoever. So right away, there's going to come a point in my life where my parents have to then sit me down and explain my origin story, if you will. And I've told it, multiple different ways, but to keep it simple again, there was a conversation I remember having with my father, when there was a miscommunication with this essentially a security guard when I got lost in a mall. And I remember this conversation of my dad telling me, that original story that, someone wasn't able to keep me. It
Wow.
opened up this door, um, in my heart that wasn't there to begin with, right? Because as a child only knows their caregiver, right? They can't piece together what mom and dad means. They just know who's right in front of them. They know consistency. They know who's taking care of them or whatever. And that's why you see even on the negative side of things where children are abused, but they'll keep running back to their parent because they don't have any framework of what healthy is. They just know what is consistent. So for me, I'm blessed to have grown up in an incredible home, parents who exposed me to my faith early on, but also gave me the room to discover my faith for my own, alongside me being Jamaican. Now I'm 100% Canadian, but my parents were always, willing to celebrate my Jamaican heritage and where I was from in any way, shape, or form, whether it was going to some kind of festival, not Caravana, because that's insane. But going to these different local
Right.
celebrations and festivals and the food and all that kind of stuff. But what really became a wrestle for me was just the neighborhood I grew up in. I was one of few people that looked like me. That's just the way it
Right.
went. And I remember that always led to a lot of questions then from them because they would see me walking around with my family, with my parents, and they're like, "Why are your parents white? Why are your what's going on there?" So I remember my whole life I've been retelling this adoption story my whole
Wow.
life, and as a kid, to be honest, it got super super exhausting,
Right.
and it was a wrestle because okay, my identity is always being tied to this abandonment, right? Dealing with this sense of abandonment in my life. So to override that, I naturally just became a people pleaser. Not
Yeah.
in the sense of like, oh, I'm just going to do good things for everybody. It was like, no, I'm going to be the best at whatever it is I'm doing. I'm going to be the fastest kid. I'm going to be the best soccer player I can possibly be. I'm going to be the funniest one. I'm going to be the most charming. I'm going to be, oh, this is what gets girls' attention. I'm going to be the guy because so long as I do that, I'll never be rejected again. Now, I may not have had that verbiage, but that was, in hindsight, that was my posture, right? And I knew that because the moment I found out someone might not like me or I wasn't involved in something, I'd have like an internal crisis, right? Like, wait,
Right.
what did I do? Why didn't I get invited to watch the OC? Why didn't I get
Probably a
to
good
go
thing.
hang? Right. Why don't the hockey guys want me to play? I'm pretty good at roller hockey. Da, 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 da. As much as I don't want to play hockey, I'll do what it takes. I'm going to learn to skate because that's what
Right.
all the kids in my neighborhood are doing, even though I love soccer. And that's really was the start of my identity wrestle, but then also my discovery of all these things that I had put before the person of Jesus, but that he also wanted to have the throne of my heart. So,
Wow. Now it's incredible, man. With us and working with men, especially adult men, um, we see a lot of times how you've got like 14-year-old, 40-year-olds, and
yeah,
you've got like 15-year-old, 50-year-olds.
yeah,
And a part of it is because they've never wrestled with kind of what you are talking about. And some of these internal longings and like gaps in their development and their care and even their discipleship that then they kind of keep trying to fill these things that just kind of leave them feeling short. And it's interesting because I actually listened to some of your music, because you do music as well, which maybe we can jump
yeah.
into. You have this one line that said this: they say it's easier to build up strong children than to repair a broken man.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, man, around the conversation of identity, so many men have not had your experience in going back and saying they don't even have the awareness that actually I have my identity's kind of mixed up. And as we start this conversation, I just want to say how important it is to lean into this conversation with Troy as he's talking about his own experience.
Yeah.
Because the cost of a man that hasn't dealt with this identity issue, regardless of where you were born, whatever it is, the cost of a man that hasn't dealt with that is way greater than the pain it takes as a young man to sort it out. And so in the same way you said, it's easier to build strong children than repair a broken man. It's easier as a young man to wrestle through these things than to become a husband and to become a dad and to become an employee and still have these gaps in our lives that we're trying to fill.
Yeah.
And so I'm just interested, even about that lyric, and in light of what you just said,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, that lyric, I'm forgetting their name, but that lyric actually came from a lady. She was an abolitionist, actually, and she was during the civil rights movement. This was something that she quoted because she was talking
Wow.
about the brokenness of the generation in these men that were coming out of such a challenging time, right? And for identity, right? Like you're talking civil rights movement where people are literally being told that for the color of your skin that you're less than animals or you're being equated to animals. And from something like that, there was this generation then that felt like had to fight for everything, right? Always were looking around their shoulder. And so it led to a lot of brokenness, right? And I won't take it through the timeline of things, but it's like civil rights movement, like all the stuff that came from there. There was a lot of brokenness. And the reason that resonated with me so much is because, especially now as a father, that was something I was like, okay, God, what does that look like to build up strong children? Because I'm watching men who are still broken.
Yeah.
The work it's taking them to deal with abandonment issues, trust issues, trauma, sexual abuse, you name it. Like as an adult, there's so many things that are actually ingrained in your mind. And so there's two things that happen when I look at, when I think about that quote and when I look at the life that the Lord has asked me to lead, and then just masculinity in general. It's like we have to redefine what strong is.
Yeah.
For men, what does it actually look like for a man to be strong? Well, when I look through scripture, some of the strongest men were men that had to come face to face with their brokenness, right?
Yeah.
Take someone very, very simple, like Samson, right? Look at what Samson was tempted by. It wasn't merely, I think sometimes we reduce Samson's temptation to that of chasing a woman. I don't think that's the case. I think Samson's number one temptation was his visions of grandeur. I think Samson wanted to make a name for himself.
Right.
He wanted to prove that I've been chosen as this judge, this special child. I want to prove that I've got it from here, that I'm not going to, fall victim to the things that my parents are worried about. Oh, you say that we can't go and marry those people. Let me show you that I can make it work. And he runs into this huge mistake. But but in the end, God still uses his strength for his glory, but it no longer looks the way that he expected. He had to be completely broken down,
Yeah.
humiliated, so that the miraculous saving that or rescue that happened had more to do with God's strength in his weakness than it had to do with Samson's strength by himself. And I just think, I'm like, God, can you show me your strength through my life without me having to go through a crisis?
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. We want to bypass all the brokenness. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But I think there are some lessons we can learn without having to learn it necessarily the hard way. Now, I'm not saying we're not going to have trouble in this life. That the Bible doesn't say that. But I think how we raise our children, it's like train them up in the way that they should go.
Yeah.
The caveat is they may not go that way. But the other side of that is like, so when they get older, it will not depart from them. So they still have a standard of ethic as a young adult, as a teen, that says, oh, man, there might be something to what my parents said. So that even if I go and become this prodigal and I run and I'm eating the pods of the pigs, there may be this moment where I come to myself and I realize, man, I do have a home and I do have a father who loves me.
Yeah, man, that's so good, dude. And I'm thinking about your story in particular and how you had to kind of do that work of identity. You know, I know you said, you know, girls, sports, athletics. I'm curious, as you kind of look at your story and maybe the story of the young men that you know in your life, what are like some key areas that young guys are going to try and fill that void of identity? Or do you think, you know, obviously identity is not just a race issue, like paint a picture of what this might look like for someone that wasn't adopted and you know, said, hey, I've grown up in a good home. I know who I am. Like, where might identity be a struggle for someone that hasn't had a similar story like you?
Yeah. I think when I speak to a lot of young men, I think there's this underlying pressure of them feeling like, well, I need to add something to society. Right. If I'm not adding something to society according to the standards of whoever, then I don't mean anything. And so you'll see two extremes. Either they become so like obsessed with, man, I'm got to make it. I got to be successful. I got to do this. I got to make my parents proud. I got to whatever. Or it's super nonchalant about everything. Because if I present, and I say present for a reason, if I present that nothing's really a big deal, then it may protect me from hurting when I'm not as successful as I think I am. So it's easier for me to actually agree with your statements when you're trying to hold me accountable and challenge me. For example, like, it's like, come on, Jordan, you can do better than this. I know you're smart. I know you're intelligent. I know you can do this, but you don't want to apply yourself. It's easy for me to go, you're right. You're right. I don't want to apply myself. You're right. I do find this boring. And then to hope that person's just going to back off. And you can be like, all right, now I'm going to go back to video games. I'm going to go back to these pursuits that are empty. And the reason I say that is because video games in and of themselves are not wrong. I'll go on record in saying that video games in and of themselves are not wrong. Wanting to pursue a relationship with someone in and of itself is not wrong. These are things that can be used for good, right? They absolutely can. But when they take the place of actually stepping into the person that God has called you to be and what that looks like, and actually doing the hard work of admitting, I actually don't know what that is, and I may actually need someone to help walk alongside me to tell me what that is or show me what that is. If we're not willing to do that, then you're going to find yourself in this cycle of trying to convince yourself that life shouldn't be taken so seriously, that I always have tomorrow. Right. And it's just not true. And I think if men were to be more realistic and honest with themselves, one of their biggest fears is, what can I actually add to society? What does it actually mean to be a husband? Man, I love this idea of being a husband, but now that I'm in it, I'm realizing, oh man, there were some dreams I had that now I can't accomplish in the same way. Yeah. And that's a very tough thing to come to terms with.
Yeah, man. It's for me, like I describe it this way. when it comes to kind of young men trying to fill these gaps and these holes, like there's a misallocation of strength. Or so, for
Yes.
example, they become like kind of like a mercenary who's just like,
Mm,
going crazy and like at all costs trying to, build equity, build wealth, or build meaning or whatever. And so they'll, blow down people on their way to try and build their career. And it's like this like house of cards that they're building at any
yeah.
cost.
Yeah.
The other side of it is like, instead of a mercenary, is kind of like a civilian who's not in the fight at all and kind of like
Yeah.
just totally passive from life. And so
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't know if that resonates with you at all.
oh, big time. Like this is Matthew 7:24-25, right? A wise man built his house on the rock.
Yeah.
God didn't say you can't build a house. God didn't say you can't pursue a career. He didn't say you can't be successful and pursue things that you like. He said, build that on me. Build your life on me, because the truth of the matter is the winds are going to come, storms are
Yeah.
going to come, and they're not going to ask you if you're ready. They're not going to ask you if you're prepared for them. They're not going to ask you any questions, right? But here's the thing that I've said in my life. It's like, Lord, if the windows get cracked, if the paint starts chipping, if if the walls start getting exposed, I just pray that my foundation is strong because I can rebuild, right? I remember my time working that I had to do basements for a season. I think so many young men can resonate to that season of, man, having to do that labor work, right? That grind work. And I actually loved it because this is how I know I'm a bona fide creative. We're like setting up the forms or whatever to pour these grade beams, these foundations. And I'm sitting here like, wow, okay. Wow, that is a beautiful form. It's really cool how you're building this skeleton structure out here. And I'm watching the concrete, the pump truck backs up. I'm watching the concrete. I'm asking the pump truck driver, I'm like, okay, so how do you know the consistency? And da 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 da. He's like, it's a feel thing. And I was
Mm,
like, in my mind, I'm like, you don't see yourself as a creative, do you? But I do. And he's like, yeah, it's a feel thing. You just kind of got to know the weather and what's going on. And you'll add a little bit of water and pull. It's like a give and take. I'm watching it fill and how it just immediately takes shape.
mm,
It takes the form because it's been mixed with water. It takes the form of whatever you've presented.
right.
And then after that is taken form, you take, you take your float and you smooth it all out and you create this nice top layer and it's beautiful. And I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm just like, again, pastor's kid. I'm like, wow, God, this is like being when you let the Holy Spirit, when you let God come into your life. God, this is my life. This is the form of my life. Take the full form of it, right? And God will do that. It's like you let him, he'll get into the cracks everywhere in your life to strengthen it, right? Like these forms are filled with rebar and all those kinds of things. But if I really wanted, I went and took a sledgehammer, I could just get rid of it. But the moment that concrete comes in, it fortifies what was just a skeleton. It
Yeah.
fortifies what was just a shell. And I'm like, God, do this in my life. Do this in my life. And then the next step is they backfill it. They just
Yeah.
cover it all. And I'm like, wait a minute. We spent all that time. Now I'm never going to see it. Just like, yeah, but a good builder knows that the foundation is strong. You don't
Mm,
necessarily need to always be trying to prove to people that the foundation is strong. They'll know it by the longevity of that structure, regardless of what happens. And I'm just like, that to me is identity in the purest form. Is God wants to take the shape of the life that you have, allow him to fill in those gaps, fill in those cracks, and he will quite literally, he'll take it over. And that foundation will be able to handle anything that comes its way. And you can rebuild with him, knowing that, man, you were there. You were there in the midst of it.
it's brilliant because I think people don't realize they have an identity issue
Mm,
until their identity is taken away from them.
that's exactly it.
And, I think about even when I was a pastor for 8 years or so, and I willingly resigned from my job. And I thought, oh, you know what? The Lord's got this crazy adventure for me. And I didn't really know what was going to happen. And before I came on staff here at Impactus, then like 2 or 3 weeks in, where like the phone calls just got like fewer and
Mm,
people didn't need me. All of a sudden, it's like, I'd spent years telling teenagers about the importance of identity. And very quickly, I was reminded that like, oh man, like this pastor title actually was something I was putting my my identity into. And so it made me realize that people don't realize that they often have identity issues until that thing is taken away from them. And like,
100%.
thinking about the young men that play sports and they're like the quarterback or they're on the soccer team and then they like get a bad injury, right? And
I
then
know
it's like,
that personally. Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like a lot of times I find men don't wrestle with this until they're in crisis mode. And tell me about the
100%.
soccer thing. You were talking about the sports thing
Yeah.
you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so I had full dreams and pursuits of going pro in soccer. I was going to go the university route. So when I was 17 in grade 11, I went on a soccer tournament with my club team in Saskatchewan. We went to Vegas, and it was basically our coaches were preparing us like, some of you want to go to university. This is the tournament you got to go to.
Wow.
This is going to be an opportunity for you to be seen by scouts. There's going to be legitimate scouts. And in all my time in soccer, there had been so many different tournaments where we were told scouts were going to be there and there never were, right? But here's my thing. I'm like, I take what I do very, very serious, regardless of who's there. So we're going to this tournament, and I end up, playing had a horrible first game, but my dad was there. My dad came up to me, and my dad was always like, he would say before every game, he's like, Troy, play like a pro before every game, before every single game. And I loved it. It was always this mentality of stay in the game, stay involved, don't give up, and be professional, right? In everything you do. Don't be the player that people like hate for because he's a jerk, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they're going to hate you, it's because you're doing your job. Right. Anyways, I was playing horrible. And my dad came up to me, I remember, between games, because it was a tournament, and he's just like, Troy, take the pressure off of yourself. Just do what you do. You know how to play this game. You know this game very well. Don't overthink it. Just go play. It radically changed the way I played. I ended up playing an incredible game, and the scout comes up to me from Taft College in California, and he's like, you probably have tons of offers, and I just want to throw my hat in the ring. And I said, sir, with all due respect, I got not a single offer. What are you talking about? Where are you from? I was like, I'm from Canada. You from Canada? That's crazy. You're telling me you don't have any other offers? I was like, sir, I don't know nothing about this life. This is who I am. Long story short, I go to this college in California, and man, you take a pastor's kid, get him out of his parents' house, and you take him to California. Like, to give people context, I was always that player on a team who you could always rely on to do his job, but I wasn't going to be the flashiest. I wasn't the one that made people go, ooh, unless it was because of my speed or something like that. I did my job. I worked hard. That's what I did. So me going to California and the rest of my teammates not getting scouted was a very, very big deal. Did it go straight to my head? Absolutely. Because for the first time in my career, I was the guy, right? I show up on campus. I'm the only international student. I'm paraded around campus like this. This is this lethal forward we've got from Canada. People are like, Canada? They're like, wait till you see him play. He's the fastest kid I've ever seen. Da 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 da. All this stuff is going on. I don't know how to process this stuff, right? I can't just FaceTime my dad. It's 2008. Like, FaceTime doesn't exist, guys. Okay. I may have had Skype, but you had to pay $20 a credit or something ridiculous. I can't just speak to my father, but also this is a foreign world for them. They don't know what I'm getting into. My pride is going because I think I've made it. Even though, I remember doing a warm-up. I had a warm-up for a soccer game, and there were scouts from Oregon State University there. They were Div 1, and they watched me warm up, not play, warm up, and went to my coach and was like, we want him next year. And my coach was like, he's not ready. And didn't tell me till later down the road. But I get told this, and I'm like, what? All this stuff is going on. I'm going to the parties. I'm getting invited to all the places. I'm the guy. Oh, this is Troy. He's da 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 da. He plays for our team. He's blah blah blah. Then I get injured.
Right.
And like overnight, all my friends disappear. And these are my teammates, my roommates. All of a sudden, I'm not getting invited anywhere. All of a sudden, no one's really wanting to hang out with me. I'm going through my own anxiety, and I could say probably a season of deep being depressed,
Right.
and just thinking to myself, I'm like, God, what do I have now? Like, I can't play. I don't, all the people that hung out with me, no one wants to hang out with me. I'm spending weekends alone on campus. They're all going on these going like American holidays. They're all going home. I'm stuck on this campus in a whole other country at 18 years old by myself. What am I doing? And it was right in that moment, the Lord was like, you are not the sum of the sport you play. You have always been valuable. You've always been my son. And if you would allow me to reintroduce myself to you, then I'll get to reintroduce you to yourself. And I remember it so vividly. And it was that was right in 2009, where I said, okay, Lord, you can have my life for real this time. I know I've spent all this time being under the umbrella of my parents, but I clearly need you for myself. Who are you to me? And it was that period of time where I ended up going to Bible college, and, I just immersed myself. I was like, okay, God, whatever you want from me, I'm going to go exactly where you need me. He's like, okay, I'm going to send you to a very conservative Bible college in northern Saskatchewan. I was like, okay, God, is there anywhere else? Like, that's where he sent me, because I needed to be arrested. Like, I really needed to be in a position where I wasn't given the same room I was given on this campus, right? Going to all these parties and drinking and hanging out with all these people and doing these things that my spirit knew, right? Anyone who's watching this can resonate, or listening to this can resonate. I was the guy, you go to the party and you're trying to prove to yourself that you can hang out there, that you can be there, but yet I'm cleaning up bottles. I'm checking on people that have passed out. I'm making sure that this person doesn't take that person. I'm making sure that, and I remember the owner of a house one time asking me, they're like, Troy, like, you don't have to do this. Why are you doing this? I'm like, I just really care about people. And they're like, you're different, man. And I was like, okay. So that was that journey for me. And, that season was pretty wild.
Yeah, it sounds like in some ways, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, almost like the foundation pouring moment for
100%.
you of 100%. Saying, actually, Lord, fill me with you. Like obviously the storm came, the injury came and blew everything down.
Yeah.
And now you're left kind of picking up the pieces and coming off of the things you said earlier about being adopted and, having to perform. And this left you, it sounds like it left you like, where do I go from here?
Well, and that's where music came out. Right. I always loved poetry. I grew up in a like a worship leading house, but I was never the worship leader. I played percussion, I played drums. And my dad was the worship leader. But I'd always had a love for music, all different kinds of music. I was always singing, always rapping, but I never had any desire to be the guy on stage rapping and singing, or never thought that was ever something that I would go after. But it was during this time, I was like, okay, Lord, what do I do? And he said, Troy, write it down. Like, what do you mean write it down? Write it down. Write down how you're feeling. And it just came out automatically as poetry. Like, I just couldn't get away from it. It was just always, now I'm not saying it was good poetry, but it was, it was poetry nonetheless. And that was where my musical outpouring really, really began. I started writing and doing poetry. And one of my friends one day heard one of my poems and like, dude, you should try and rap. And I said, absolutely not. Yeah. I'm not going to be that guy. What's that?
I'm from Regina.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, bro, I'm not doing this. He's like, no, just try, like, get a beat, whatever. And just at least try doing one of your poems as hip hop. Cause this sounds like a rap to me. And I'm like, all right. So I did it. And I released it on early days of Facebook pages, back when people actually engaged with them and paid attention.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I know all of that.
That pained my heart just to say it out loud. But I did it, and it just took off as far as something could take off in Regina. Immediately, I come home and people are like, yo, come to this event. I'm going around places, still trying to like navigate the life the Lord needs me. But I'd go to a bar and then someone's like, hey, are you Troy Wonders? That was my name back in the day. They're like, are you Troy Wonders? And I was like, yeah. They're like, yo, I heard that stuff, bro. is that like gospel stuff? And I was like, oh, shoot, wait a minute. We're not supposed to have this conversation in the bar.
Right.
I don't want to talk about this in the bar. And then immediately these guys are having these existential moments with me in this bar. And I'm realizing, wait a second, God, this is my story. I'm just telling my story
Right.
of you, and they're finding themselves. Wait a minute. There's something here. Right. And I'm so grateful for the Lecrae's of the world, because right at that time, seeing someone like Lecrae, seeing what he was doing showed me, I'm like, okay, so this is a legitimate thing. Like I could do this for God, like actually, and do it looking like me.
Right.
I don't have to have the button down shirt all the time. I can dress how I want to dress and still impact people for the gospel. And so that's how music started. And, now it's been 10 years since I dropped my first album, which is crazy to think about. And it's just been so cool how sharing the story and how God has radically changed my life and has helped me combat these identity issues and combat this orphan mentality,
Right.
to really walk in sonship. And I'm still growing and I'm still learning to see what that looks like. I'm a father, so I'm now learning even more about sonship as a father, because I'm realizing like, oh, I see it now.
Yeah. It's interesting. A friend of mine who was adopted said that having his own son and looking into the eyes of the eyes of someone that was his was like
That's exactly it.
It was such a revealing moment of the father's heart for him. And
Yeah.
he, like, for him, it's like his understanding of sonship kind of came alive. And I wanted to ask you, Troy, like, as you do your music, and how do you balance it now as an adult, that like orphan spirit doesn't rise its ugly head, that like maybe if you don't get the likes on your post, or not to think that you're that insecure or anything, but as you do new music and maybe it doesn't reach like you thought it would, or it doesn't land like you thought it landed, or how do you wrestle with it now as a man and as a dad, that like, is it still a real struggle at times to say, oh man, like, okay, I am a son. I'm not, I'm not scribe. Like I am scribe, but I'm not just scribe. Like, do you still struggle with that at all? And how do you mitigate that?
So I'll say it like this. There's a passage of scripture, that talks about, when a person is basically set free, right? And when a spirit leaves the house, it's like there has to be an infilling, because they're going to come back 10 times stronger.
Right.
What I've realized when it comes to the orphan spirit, when it comes to this abandonment struggle, is it's what I fill myself with after is going to determine how I respond when that orphan spirit comes knocking. Because the truth of the matter is, he will always come knocking. That it will always come knocking. But the beautiful thing is, as I'm growing in the Lord, like I have pastoral accountability. My wife and I are always communicating and always talking and growing together. I have elders in my church that, they've walked me through some of these really tough things, because I through them and holding me accountable and praying for me, and also being given the space in my life to identify things that they're seeing. Like, Lord, give them eyes from me. Like, give them your eyes for me.
Right.
Like, so that they can identify things before they happen. Now, at one point where it's like, okay, I know who's the orphan spirit's knocking and I'm scared, but he can't get in. And I just need this assurance that he's not going to get in today. Okay. But then it goes to a point of like, ooh, I recognize the weight of his foot on the doorstep.
Right.
Ooh, now I recognize his foot pattern coming up the gravel road, right? It's like learning to recognize the orphan spirit's attack from a distance, and knowing these places in my life that I actually have to safeguard myself before I even get to that point is what is helping immensely. So to make it practical for someone, because that sounds very poetic in nature, to make it practical, where I'm at with my music, and if I'm doing music, if I'm going on the road, my pastors, my elders, and my wife all know where I'm going, what I'm doing. But they also know when the event comes up, right? So I'll tell them, hey, there's this event. What do you think about this? I would love to do it. And I'm just honest. It's like, I would love to do it, but I just want to know your thoughts on that. right? Because you're walking beside me. And I also have a responsibility to my family and to a certain degree, the serving in my church community, and that's because of what I said, right? I care deeply about my church community and serving in my church community, because that in and of itself, through serving the Lord and serving in his house, even that helps combat these other things, because now I'm in the midst of a praying people.
Yeah.
I'm not just out trying to serve a praying people. I'm in the midst of a praying people. And sometimes, my pastor will always say this. He's like, Troy, I'm not in a position where I'm going to say no. It's not my job to say no to you, right? Like, you're not my kid. But what I do know is that if the Lord is called me to entrust you to be to shepherd you, he's going to help me identify maybe things in your walk or in your life right now that says, maybe you shouldn't go on that one. Or, okay, Troy, you want to do this album, you want to release this stuff. I'm sensing some pride in this area, or where pride could come up here. Or they'll ask me questions, but very, very practical questions about, I'll finish a set or something like that, and it went amazing. But they'll ask me, hey, how do you feel? My wife will ask me not how did it go, but how do you feel? And the difference between that is, like, I could do a set that went amazing, but my heart is just so grieved, or I was frustrated coming into it, or whatever. And it helps me unpack those things and lay it at the feet of Jesus. So even if I go and I kill a set and it goes amazing, my wife will ask me, how did you feel? And I'll really think about, man, was God glorified? Because ultimately I want that well done, not that, hey, you killed it.
Yeah.
Right? I want that well done, knowing that I fulfilled what God asked me to in this place. And that in and of itself, leaving yourself vulnerable with the right people will combat pride. Because my pastor has full reign to crack jokes on me, right?
Yeah.
He'll get me. My elders, they'll get me, right? And that in of itself helps me remember my sonship. It helps me be reminded that, man, God, you've actually brought these people in my life, not necessarily my wife, but these men of God that can help father me in a spiritual sense. That helps me, it's not stay humble, but pursue sonship, right? It's because saying stay humble feels weird. Like, oh, I'm just trying to stay humble. Well, that's even it can be an even prideful statement itself.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm just pursuing sonship. That's where I'm at.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. What I'm hearing you say is having it's relationships, right? It's like welcoming people into your life that you give permission to speak into your life. And I think a lot of young guys struggle because they actually don't know there's an identity problem to begin with. And so I just, as our listeners and our viewers are listening to this, don't for a second think that this is a podcast for someone else, right? And that, I should send this to this guy who's really passionate about sports, or really just chasing girls like crazy, or is really job focused. The question is, are you a son? Like, do you view yourself first as a son? And so I'm interested, Troy, as we bring this to a close, if you were to just define sonship, like what do you actually mean when you say, like, I'm pursuing sonship? Like, what do you mean by that?
So 2 Corinthians 6:18 is what I like to call the call to sonship. And it says, and I will be your father, and you will be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. And obviously this was Paul paraphrasing the Lord. And this phrase sonship can sound trivial, and it can sound complicated, because naturally a person starts thinking about their relationship with their earthly father. But the danger of doing that is you're looking now at a father-son relationship that is imperfect. You're looking at a father-son relationship that is afflicted by time, space, and sin, right? This call to sonship is recognizing the Lord, like recognizing God is your father, and that he has good, like, not merely good plans for you, but he is actively pursuing a relationship with you. And so, to make it even more practical, you look at the story of the prodigal son.
Yeah.
The term prodigal means wasteful. Yeah, like that term in and of itself means wasteful. And so you look at the story of the prodigal son. This is the good father that we serve. The prodigal son says, God, give me my inheritance. I'm ready. I want to go experience the world. He's like, okay, right? I envision this father who's like, all right, you technically are old enough, and if you want to go experience the world, who am I to say no? I got everything you need right here, but by all means. And the father watches his son go into the world. And you see, as the story goes, he squanders his inheritance. He squanders his wealth. He squanders this extra. And that's an important thing to look at it as. All of this inheritance was extra from what the father had. And he goes and he's out in the world. And again, it's not until he squanders it all and that he's laying with the pigs and eating the pods, like whatever nasty situation that is, Google it on your own time, that he comes to himself. The scripture says, and then he came to himself and went back to his father.
Yeah.
And he comes up the road and you see him running to him. There's such an important exchange that happens here because the son, upon arrival, shows up and immediately is like, Dad, I let you down. I squandered your wealth. I'm so sorry. Right? I'm paraphrasing, obviously. I'm so sorry. I squandered your wealth. This, that, and the third. But I needed to come home. The father doesn't hesitate. Yeah. He grabs his robe. He says, get in my ring. And the signet ring would recognize recognize who the father is. Like, okay, so you're wearing your father's ring now. So that means that you're now a person of importance. And he grabs his robe and puts it on him. The reason this exchange is so important is because so many men think that they have to clean themselves up before they come home to their father. The call to sonship says, I don't care what you've been rolling in. My robe, my grace, my mercy covers a multitude of sins. Yeah. Right? And he puts this robe on him while he's stinking, while he's gross, while he's unshowered, while he smells like the sin he's been in. And he covers him and he puts his name on him. And by putting his name on him, it says to everyone in this vineyard, everyone into this area, this is my son. Don't ask him any questions. He's home. All right, go get the food. Go turn the music up. Go get the party going. But it doesn't stop there, right? Sometimes we stop there when it comes to this call of sonship, because there's now an exchange in a relationship that has to happen between this prodigal son who's come home, where the father has to basically say to him, I could care less about what you spent. You came home because you thought I was disappointed in you spending this money, but I'm welcoming you home because my son was lost and now he is found. Yeah. He's come home. I'm not worried about inheritance. There's way more where that came from. But this is where there's also the son who's now frustrated and jealous that he's throwing a party for the son that came home. And I had to come to terms with this guy in my life as well. The son who was jealous that this person who just came back to the Lord, and I will be so real for you because I think it's important that you see this practically. I was a recording artist, or am a recording artist, and I've worked my butt off. And I've worked very, very hard to get where I'm at and have a successful music career. I watched people who had just fresh come from the world. They gave their life to Christ. Overnight, they decide they're going to make Christian music. And what happens? They get shot up the blog sites. They're on getting all the opportunities that everyone wants to hear their story. They're getting their music is going so successful. And I remember being the son who stayed in the home, who's like, wait a minute, I've been here. I've been working my butt off. I've been out in the field doing my father's will. I didn't get all that. And what does the father say in this parable? He says, son, you've always had access. You've always had access to everything I had. Listen, if you wanted a party, you were allowed to just have a party because you were home. And I think sometimes we don't see ourselves as that son as well. The call to sonship means, man, I have access to a father who has more than enough. I have access to a father who has rolled out the red carpet for me every single morning that I wake up. He's rolled it out for me and said, hey, good morning, my beloved son. And all he's asking for us in return is to be a son and be about our father's business. Hey, dad. Hey, father, what would you like from me today? how can I use my skills, my talents, my abilities? How can I use my charisma? How can I use my personality for your glory? This is the call to sonship, is recognizing that we serve a good father who is not so concerned with where you've come from, but that you've come home.
Yeah.
And I pray that encourages somebody, that's listening to this. It's like pride will have you thinking that you get to determine whether or not you're worthy of God's grace.
Wow.
You're not.
No, it's good, man. And it's funny because I think sometimes we think the call to sonship is just for those that run away from God.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh yeah, that he needs to know he's a child of God. He's out drinking and partying with the girls. And it's like, actually, no, even the religious people that have been following all the rules can live at home and still be lost.
Yeah.
They're still called sonship. And so
Yeah.
I forget who it was that said this, but said like the great risk, the hardest thing about being a son is to be the younger son,
Oh,
the
man.
prodigal son, and not become the older son.
100%.
And that's the challenge. And so, young men, if you're listening today, I want you to hear this. You are, though your sports and your hobbies and all your interests, your background, your race, everything is an important part of who you are. You're not just that, right?
Yeah.
You're much more than that. And I would encourage you, man, check out Troy's stuff, listen to his music. It's got some incredibly rich material. And Troy, what are some other ways people can get connected with what you're doing? You've got a great course on Right Now Media and other places that you can purchase it. About identity. And so if you're a youth pastor or a leader that think this is a conversation worth having with your students or whatever, where can people find out more about what you're doing at Apologetics Canada?
Yeah. So anything related to Apologetics Canada, you can go to apologeticscanada.com. The branded series is available online. If your church has a subscription to Right Now Media, you can just check out branded Rethinking Identity. You could just look up Apologetics Canada and that'll be on there. If you're wanting to, kind of follow my journey of things that I'm doing, my Instagram page is just scribe_music for the music side of things. And so that'll entail my hip hop. That'll entail the stuff I'm doing also with my worship team, in Love Quest International Worship. But if you also just want to follow my personal journey and whatever, my other Instagram is Prairie Boy Troy, and that one is much more family related. You might see more stuff related to AC and the podcast and that kind of thing. But just in general, I'm not difficult to find. My music you can find on any platform under Scribe Music. I always tell people I'm the guy that looks like me. So if you find someone else, then it's not me. But that's really what I got going on. I love just kind of engaging with people with where they're at, and music for me is a vehicle to just continue to take me to the places that the Lord needs me to continue sharing the gospel message, and identity just so happens to be one of those modes of doing that. So
very cool, man. Dude, appreciate you being on the podcast today, and we'll have to jump back to that Popeyes conversation another time.
Yeah.
I can see where it all entwines a little. So listen, man, thank you so much, and let's chat again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. We'll see you.